I want to start with the wedding, not because it is where everything went wrong. I understand now that things were already going wrong before the wedding, that the seeds of what I eventually found out were planted earlier than I ever wanted to believe. But I want to start there because it was the last day of my life when I knew exactly what I had and trusted it completely. And there is something important about remembering what that felt like before I tell you what came after. It was May of 1872. I was 26 years old, and I was marrying a woman named Grace, who had dark hair and a laugh that could fill a room, and who I had loved since I was 22 and she was 19, and we had met at a cattle auction in Presidio County, where she had come with her father and I had come with mine, and we had stood at the same fence looking at the same animals and started talking, and not stopped for 4 years until the talking became a life. My best friend Tom stood beside me at the altar. He had been my best friend since we were 8 years old, which means he had been my best friend for 18 years by the time he stood there in his good coat watching me marry Grace. We had grown up on neighboring ranches, learned to ride together, worked cattle together as young men, been through the ordinary difficulties of frontier life side by side in the way that men who grow up together are side by side. Not always talking about it, not always making a show of it, just there, reliably and completely there. The way the land was there and the sky was there. I trusted Tom the way I trusted the ground under my feet, without thinking about it, because it had always been solid and I had never had any reason to check. He gave a toast at the wedding supper that made everyone laugh and made Grace blush and made me feel, in that particular way of the best moments in a life, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the people I was supposed to be with. I remember his face when he raised that glass. I have thought about his face many times in the years since, and I still cannot find in the memory of it anything that should have told me what I did not yet know. He just looked like Tom. My best friend Tom, happy for me on my wedding day. That is the last clear, uncomplicated memory I have. Everything after it has something else in it now, some shadow cast backward by what I eventually learned, and I cannot always tell anymore what was real and what I am seeing through the lens of knowing. This is one of the things nobody tells you about betrayal. It does not just damage the present and the future. It goes back through everything you thought you knew and leaves its mark there too. We built a life, Grace and I, on 90 acres in the western part of the county. Cattle mostly, with a small kitchen garden that Grace tended with the same focused attention she brought to everything she cared about. We were not wealthy and we were not struggling. And we worked hard, and the work paid off in the steady, incremental way that honest work on good land pays off if you are patient enough and stubborn enough and willing to get up early enough. We had a son named James in 1874 and a daughter named Ruth in 1876, and the children changed everything the way children change everything, deepened it, made it more serious, gave the work a weight and a purpose that it had not quite had before. Tom was around. This is the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I have turned over and examined from every angle in the years since. Tom was always around. He had his own ranch 4 miles north, and he was a bachelor, which meant he ate many of his meals with us and spent many of his evenings at our table. And I had always considered this one of the good things about our life, that my best friend was close enough to be present in it, that my children knew him and loved him, that Grace and he got along well, and the three of us could spend an evening together without any of the awkwardness that sometimes comes when you bring a marriage and a close friendship into the same room. I considered it a good thing. I considered it one of the things I had to be grateful for. I was a fool. Not because I trusted my wife and my best friend. Trusting the people closest to you is not foolishness. It is the reasonable response to a life that has given you no evidence against it. I was a fool because I stopped paying attention. Because I had decided that everything was what it appeared to be, and I had stopped checking. The way a man stops checking a fence line he has always found in good repair and misses the section that has been coming loose for months. The evidence was there. I understand this now with the clarity of someone looking backward, and I want to be honest about it because being dishonest about it would be a way of protecting myself that I have no longer any interest in. Tom's horse was at my ranch more than his own business required. Grace was in better spirits on the evenings he came to supper than on the evenings he did not, and I had noticed this and filed it under "she enjoys good company," the way I had been filing things for years under explanations that kept the world looking the way I needed it to look. They found reasons to be in the same room, and reasons to be on the same errands, and reasons that, individually, were perfectly ordinary, and collectively were a pattern I chose not to read. I chose not to read it. I want to say that plainly. I am not saying I knew and pretended not to know. I genuinely did not know, not in the part of myself that knows things consciously and acts on them, but somewhere deeper, in the part of a man that knows things before he is ready to know them. I think I knew. And I chose, again and again, not to bring that knowing to the surface, where it would have required me to do something about it. 10 years. That is how long it went on, by my best accounting of it afterward. From somewhere in 1873, the year after the wedding, to the autumn of 1882, when I found out. 10 years of my wife and my best friend and my complete unwillingness to see what was in front of my face. I found out from James. My son was 8 years old in 1882. He was a serious boy, quiet in the way of children who listen more than they speak. And he came to me on a Saturday morning in October with the specific expression of a child who is carrying something too heavy for him and has decided that giving it to an adult is the only way to put it down. He told me what he had seen. He told me simply and without drama, the way children tell hard truths when they have not yet learned to soften them. And I listened to my 8-year-old son tell me about his mother and my best friend, and I kept my face very still, and I thanked him, and I told him he had done the right thing, and I sent him out to play. Then I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. I did not cry. I did not rage. I sat at the table with my hands flat on the wood, and I felt the world reorganize itself around me the way the world reorganizes when something fundamental has changed. And I thought about 10 years, and the thinking was the worst thing I had ever done because 10 years is a very long time. And thinking about 10 years is thinking about everything. Grace came in from the garden an hour later and saw me at the table, and she knew. I could see it in her face the moment she saw mine. She understood that the thing she had been living alongside for 10 years had finally arrived at the kitchen table, and her face did something complicated and private, and then went still. The way people go still when they are preparing for something they cannot avoid. I asked her one question. I said, "How long?" She sat down across from me and she told me. She did not lie and she did not minimize, and she did not try to explain in a way that made it smaller than it was. She told me the full truth, plainly, looking at me across the table the way she had always looked at me, those dark eyes that I had loved for 16 years. And the full truth was larger than I had believed, even in the worst version I had imagined during the hour I had been sitting alone. I asked her if she loved him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. I asked her if she loved me. She was quiet for longer. Then she said, "I have always loved you." And I believed her, which was its own particular cruelty. That both things were true simultaneously, that she had loved me for 16 years and loved him for 10, and that the love for me had been real and had not been enough to stop the other thing, and that I was sitting at my own kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood, trying to understand how a person does that, how the heart accommodates two such incompatible truths at the same time. And I could not understand it, and I have never fully understood it in all the years since. I went to see Tom that afternoon. I want to tell you that I was calm. I was not calm. I rode to his ranch in the kind of controlled fury that is worse than the uncontrolled kind, because it is all going inward, compressing itself, becoming something denser and more damaging than anger that comes out. I tied my horse at his gate, and I walked to his door and I knocked, and he opened it, and he saw my face. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He just stood in the doorway, looking at me with the face of a man who has been waiting for this moment for 10 years, and is not surprised that it has arrived, and is not going to insult either of us by pretending it hasn't. I looked at him for a long time. 18 years of friendship, every significant moment of my adult life with this man somewhere in the frame. My wedding, my children's births, the hard seasons and the good ones. The evenings at the table that I had believed were one thing and that had been, for 10 years, something else. I said, "You were my best friend." I said it quietly. Not as an accusation. There was no point in accusation at this stage. The damage was complete, and accusation was just noise added on top of it. I said it as a statement of fact, of what had been and what was now gone, and the past tense of it was the sharpest thing in the sentence. Tom looked at me and his face did something I had not expected. It broke. Not dramatically, not in the way of a man performing remorse. It simply came apart. The composed surface of a man who has been living with something for 10 years, giving way to what was underneath. And what was underneath was grief and shame, and something that looked very much like the face of a man who had loved two people at the same time and had damaged both of those loves in ways that could not be repaired. He said, "I know." He said it twice. "I know. I know." I turned around and I walked back to my horse and I rode home, and I did not go back to Tom's ranch for 3 years. What happened to Grace and me is the harder part of this story to tell, because it is not simple, and I do not want to make it simple by cutting out the parts that complicate it. We did not separate immediately. We had 2 children who were 8 and 6 years old, and a ranch that both of us had built, and a life that was real and solid in all the ways that mattered, even though it had been built on a foundation that had a crack in it I had not known about. We talked. For months we talked. In the evenings after the children were in bed, at the kitchen table where so many things had happened in our marriage already. And the talking was the hardest thing either of us had ever done, because it required us to be completely honest with each other in a way that we had not been completely honest, her through action and me through inaction, for 10 years. She told me things I did not want to know, and I told her things I had never said out loud, and by the end of it, we were different people than we had been at the beginning, raw and tired, and more known to each other than we had ever been, which was a strange result of the worst year of our marriage. I did not leave. This was a decision I made not once, but every day for a long time, because every day the decision was available again, and I had to choose it again. I stayed because James and Ruth needed their parents in the same house, and because the ranch needed both of us, and because somewhere underneath all the damage, the love was still there, stubborn and inconvenient and refusing to be destroyed by what had happened to it. Not the uncomplicated love of the years before. That was gone, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But something that had been tested now in the worst possible way, and was still, improbably, present. Grace ended it with Tom. She told me this, and I believed her, and I watched the months go by and saw nothing to contradict it, and eventually, the believing and the watching became simply knowing. The way things settle from uncertainty into fact when enough time has passed without the uncertainty being confirmed. The marriage was different after. Quieter in some ways, more careful, as if we were both handling something that we understood was still fragile, and that we had agreed, without discussing it explicitly, to handle with more care than we had been handling it before. There was grief in it that had not been there before, not just mine but hers, which surprised me until I understood that she had lost something too, that ending something 10 years long is its own kind of grief, regardless of how it should never have begun. We had 15 more years together. They were real years, honest years, built on a foundation that we had tested in the worst possible way and rebuilt from what remained. Not easy years. No years on a cattle ranch in West Texas are easy, but years with something in them that the first 10 years had not quite had, which was the knowledge of exactly what we had and what it had cost and why it was worth holding on to. Grace died in the spring of 1897. A fever that came quickly and did not leave, the way fevers came in those years, indifferent to what they were ending and how much was unfinished. She was 50 years old. She died in the bedroom of the ranch house we had built together, with James and Ruth beside her and my hand in hers, and the last thing she said to me was my name, just my name, in the voice I had known for 25 years, and I held her hand until it was over. I sat on the porch afterward for a long time. The land was flat and dark in every direction, and the stars were out the way they get in West Texas in the spring, thick and close, and I thought about everything. About the wedding in May of 1872, and the altar and Tom's toast, and the uncomplicated happiness of a man who trusted the ground under his feet, and about all the years after, the complicated ones, and the real ones, and the hard ones, and about the woman who had just left me in the bedroom, and who I had loved for 25 years in ways I was not always proud of, and ways that had cost me things I could not have predicted, and ways that had given me things I could not have imagined either. Tom came to her funeral. He stood at the back of the churchyard, and he did not come to speak to me, and I did not go to speak to him, but I saw him there, and I understood why he had come, and I did not begrudge him the coming. He had loved her too. For 10 years he had loved her, and for 15 years after that he had lived with the ending of it, and with what it had cost everyone. And he had come to say goodbye the only way still available to him, from a distance, without asking for anything. I looked at him once across the churchyard. He looked back. We held the look for a moment, and then the moment ended, and we both looked back at the grave, and that was the last time I saw Tom Harden clearly in my life, and it was enough. James took over the ranch when he was 22. He runs it well, better than I did in some ways, with his mother's focused attention and his father's stubbornness, and the particular competence of a young man who grew up understanding that the land rewards honest work and punishes everything else. Ruth married a man from the next county who is decent and kind, and who looks at her the way a man should look at his wife. I sit on the porch in the evenings now, and I watch the sun go down over the flat Texas land, and I think about the life I had. All of it. The whole complicated, honest weight of it. The wedding and the children and the years of not seeing what was in front of me, and the year of seeing it clearly, and the 15 years of choosing every day to stay, and the last year of holding a hand until it went still. I would not trade it. That is the truest thing I know how to say. I would not trade the complicated version for a simpler one. Because the complicated version was real, and the real version was mine, and the grief of it and the love of it were the same thing in the end. The way everything real is the same thing in the end. The land and the sky and the work and the people you love and lose and carry forward. That is all a life is, the carrying of it forward. I am still carrying. Tom Harden died in 1901 on his ranch 4 miles north. He never married. James found his father sitting on the porch the morning after the funeral, looking north toward the Harden property, and did not ask what he was thinking. Some things a son understands without being told.